You know, as much as we love the idea of an M5 Touring now, that wasn't always the case. The two cars prior to this one sold barely 2,000 units between both of those generations. And that wasn't because they weren't great cars. No, the first M5 Touring ever was the E34. It was produced between 1992 and 95. When I say produced, I mean literally hand-built by BMW M in Garching. And it had a beautiful inline-six 3.8 litre naturally aspirated engine linked only to a 5-speed manual gearbox. And it also had self-leveling rear suspension, and back then stood as one of the fastest family supercars that you could ever buy. But sadly only sold around 900 units and was only ever available in left-hand drive because BMW had no data to suggest this type of car could ever do well. And as much as Audi liked to say that the origins of the superwagon came from their famous RS2 Avant, the fact remains that the RS2 Avant was brought to the market 2 years after the E34 M5 wagon. So yes, a beautiful car, but then the whole concept skipped a whole generation. And the next time we saw it, well, this car, I personally think, if this was sold even today in its current form, it would outstrip the demand for every other super saloon and wagon in segment, because it's just, the idea of it is so glorious. And that's of course the E61 M5 Touring with that thunderous 5-litre V10 naturally aspirated engine. Crisp angle design that now has aged so well. That V10 produced upwards of 507 horsepower, all going to the rear wheels. Yes, we had a slightly disappointing SMG gearbox, but we can forgive that then for this wide arch, quad exhaust, drool-worthy monster of a car. Good luck trying to find one now though. They only made around 1,000. 222 of those were right-hand drive in this occasion, and they wound up in the UK. That was one market now where they were starting to really love the idea of the performance wagon. But despite that, it skipped another generation because, let's be honest, BMW really didn't believe in the idea of the performance wagon. And we didn't love estates as much as data proves we do today. Skip forward to 2025, and it's a drastically different market that we live in now. One example of this, Audi's RS6 now, it's quite long in the tooth, it's a very old model. But this year, in the first half of this year, it has sold more of those cars than it did in the first half of 2024. Demand is soaring for a car that is essentially outgoing, and everybody knows the new one is coming. That's how much people love a great performance wagon. But at the same time, we live in a time where the car industry and us as customers are having the EV agenda pushed down our throats by governments. And sometimes questions rightly being asked about how to balance the idea of great performance and efficiency at the same time. But it's this unease and this climate that caused some manufacturers like AMG to cower in fear and run for the hills and create something like the 4-cylinder C63 that was dead on arrival as far as we were concerned. Yet in the same breath, BMW M did not do this. They instead listened for their customers and went the other direction and gave us cars like the fantastic M3 Touring, a car that had never existed before, a pure combustion M3, and it has sold hand over fist. A car that was a huge risk for them, yet it does exist. And not just all new cars like that, but even special versions of those cars. We now have the M3 CS, which actually sits as the fastest super wagon on the Nürburgring, including this M5 Touring at the moment, which is an incredible achievement. And now this, the G99 M5 Touring, available all around the world, even in the USA. What a time to be alive for a BMW M fan. But this car has not had the perfect entry and reception that the M3 Touring did. Instead, there's a lot of questions being raised around the fact that it's a plug-in hybrid, the weight of the car, and whether all of this still allows us to accept it as a true M5. So we're going to tackle that question today and also try to understand where the M5 sits in the lineup when something like the M3 CS Touring exists. And I also want to compare it directly to my own ownership experience with the M3 Touring, living with it, and with the RS6 long-term, and living daily with these cars with my family, because I actually think this is potentially their best daily car. So guys, once again, let's hit the road with this, the brand new G99 M5 Touring. Just imagine owning a piece of automotive history on your wrist, and not just any automotive history, one of the greatest cars of all time. And in endurance racing, that car was the Porsche 956. Debuting at Silverstone in 1982, it finished 6 laps ahead of the next best car, and in the years following, locked out podiums at the top, like in 1983 at Le Mans, leading to that famous Porsche marketing poster, "Not everyone is perfect." And the most unique 956 was created by the private team of Richard Lloyd Racing. So they identified a weakness in the standard car and created a new honeycomb chassis. Porsche themselves stamped their new chassis as the 106B, and they went on to beat the factory cars at Le Mans. And now Rec Watchers have created a pair of timepieces that embody not only the story of the greatest endurance race car of all time, but also watches that hold apart from that car. Take a look at the 12 o'clock marker and you'll see the 30-minute counter holding an actual piece of the 106B's aluminium clutch disc. Turn it over and the open exhibition case back, where the rotor is sculpted like the gold BBS rim, with even the hex screw drive detail. And the watch face is finished in that exact honeycomb pattern, directly echoing that innovative chassis design. Then you'll see the red mark on the dial at 374 kilometers an hour, the Le Mans record speed the 956 set in 1986. So we have two versions, 448 pieces in the Liqui Moly colours and 508 in the Richard Lloyd Racing livery. So if you want Porsche Motorsport history on your wrist, be quick, because these are special pieces that will never be made again. There's a link in the description with more details, and there's currently 20% off the pre-order, and if you use our code RBR, you'll get an extra 10% off your order as well. So a huge thanks to Rec Watchers for sponsoring today's episode with such a special product, and to you guys for always supporting the channel and our sponsors. Now, let's get back to the car. So guys, despite what data suggests, I'm willing to bet that back when the E34 M5 Touring and the E61 certainly were announced, that there were petrolheads around the world hankering for those cars. But those requests fell on deaf ears with BMW back then as they were. But since then, they've proven themselves to be a manufacturer who are not only willing to listen to their customers, but actually act upon it. And you know what? They have reaped the rewards of that positive attitude, and it should be an example to all manufacturers. Take, for example, the M3 Touring. This was a big risk for them, a car that had never existed, but something that customers had always wanted. And now, just look at the sales figures. In the UK in 2023, they sold 1,500 M3s, okay? 700 of those, like 46%, were Tourings in that version of the car, which is incredible. And they're seeing that in other markets as well, with the Touring either neck and neck or even surpassing the sedan. And that just shows you now, in this day and age, how much we love the performance wagon. So the existence of this M5 Touring isn't just a nostalgia grab, but it is actually based on not just what we want, but also real data that these are cars that people really, really do want. So a massive market shift compared to the past. But people are still skeptical of this car, as I said. The 2435 kg curb weight does not help. The fact that it's a plug-in hybrid rather than a pure V8 doesn't help its case either. But as you may have heard from people who've driven the car, people like myself, Joe Achilles, Chris Harris, there is more to this story than meets the eye. But I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at this from a different perspective today. We're going to look at it from a what-if perspective. We're going to completely ignore the battery and the electric motor and that whole plug-in hybrid system and see what have BMW M done to a standard fiver to turn it into this M5. And of course, we start with the most M5 thing possible, which is a unique wide body, both on the front and on the rear. Wide arches looking absolutely gorgeous. It's 75mm wider on the front, which you can really tell with this design, and 48mm on the rear. Again, think that kind of RS6 width, but it's even more aggressive, I think, in this new M5 Touring. It's got a unique illuminated iconic grille, which in practice I've found to be subtle and not that in your face. We've got staggered wheels at 20 and 21 inches, which the car sits beautifully on. And you see on this car today, we have the Pirelli P0Rs, and we've got massive 100mm pipes on the back, and generally a stance that is pretty much unmatched on this side of the market. It is a beautiful car, and our car today is finished in a very dark blue, almost looks black. We've got the ultimate package with the carbon ceramic brakes, carbon fiber everywhere, so a really well appointed car. And if you want even more carbon and more M performance parts, those are of course readily available now, with M providing as many parts as you would like on these cars. Then under the skin, we of course have a V8. It's the S68 V8. It's seen a few updates in terms of heat and oil management, and then this produces 585 horsepower and 750 Newton meters by itself. It's a great engine. We know it can be more powerful. Maybe they're leaving a gap for a higher model later on. That pairs to the M8-speed Steptronic gearbox, and of course we have M xDrive and M's differential, and those have a system that of course allows the drift mode as we had in the previous M5. We've then got the famed M adaptive suspension with electronic dampers at each wheel. We've got M's variable ratio steering, which has a rigid connection now alongside 1.5 degree rear wheel steering, and we've got a ton of other stiffening done to the chassis in order to promote rigidity in a car that is really going to need it. And finally, M compound brakes or M ceramics, both with 2 pedal settings. Now, if we dispassionately look at that entire spec on paper, that is pretty much exactly the same as your previous M5. So any notion that this is somehow not an M5 is really unfounded. But BMW M could not have made this. Regulations, particularly in Europe, simply do not allow them to do that. So they did the next best thing. Instead of getting rid of the V8, they brought in the plug-in hybrid system. That consists of a 19 kilowatt performance battery. We also have the e-motor that then sits in the gearbox, and this adds another 197 horsepower where needed and a boost of a lot of torque as well. And our battery gives us quoted range of around about 43 miles on pure electric, but I've actually found it to give more, which we will discuss in a minute. That altogether gives us 727 horsepower, 1000 Newton meters of torque, and a 0 to 60 quoted of 3.5 seconds. And those are great performance figures despite the weight, and it is pretty much our old M5 formula, but with the hybrid system added. And yes, it's half a ton heavier than our predecessor, but the litmus test for this hybrid system is, does it add enough positivity in terms of what it gives you in terms of electric range? And have they been able to negate the effects of the weight enough when it comes to the act of dynamism? Now, of course, we'll answer that on the road, but the amazing thing before we do that is that the first 6 months of sales figures already show an incredible story. The M5 Touring is neck and neck with the sedan. 50% of cars being built on the same production line are the Touring. That's the demand that we have for it. And even more amazing than that, in a market that never have Tourings in the USA, the M5 Touring is outstripping the sedan for demand. That is incredible to me. So much so that M's having to rethink their strategy out there because they don't sell the M3 Touring right now, and consider whether they need to sell the next generation M3 Touring out there as well. So well done, guys. Give yourself a pat on the back, and I think a round of applause to BMW M. One thing you guys have found incredible, and I have as well, that there's already an LCI seen testing which appears to have the new class face on the front of it. It's only been like a year since this car is out. Will this be a pre-LCI midlife facelift, or are they testing this well in advance of the LCI? I don't know, and I'm really worried what that car is going to look like, because I think this looks great. I'm not really that impressed with the look of the new iX3 with the new class. What do you guys think? Is it going to look good or not? Now we've got to get on the road. I want to impart my experience to you of living with this car. Before that, a quick look at what M have done in the interior and the hybrid bits that they have added. Now it's jumping in the M5 Touring, and you get quite a nice welcome through this living ambient light bar. You'll see the tricolor of the M badge flow through the lights here all around twice, and then end up settling in the middle just under the spec of your car shown in the screen at the top. It's a nice little thing, and it happens every time you get in, and I really like it. And the other thing that you'll notice as soon as you get in the car are those, again, typical M DNA things, where it's the stuff that BMW M have always changed in the M5 versus the 5 Series. So unique steering wheel, you've got the unique M Sports seats. I love the seats in here. They look great with the M5 logo. The lumbar support has been really good, as has been the support around your butt as well. So all keeping you in place when you're being chucked around quite hard actually in a very fast car like this. And in this fully kitted out car today, carbon absolutely everywhere. And of course the most important part really, which is the M drive control area over here. And you're left in no doubt that you are indeed sitting in a BMW M5. The steering wheel I actually think is lovely. You've got the illuminated M1 and M2 buttons that are more integrated into the shape of the steering wheel than ever before. You can't miss them literally when you're driving in terms of pressing them when you need them. And behind those, you've got the massive shift paddles with the boost button that, honestly, this is non-spoiler alert for later, I've never used it. You don't need it, it's not part of your normal driving. The rest is good in terms of the buttons on the steering wheel, none of that touch haptic nonsense, they are just real buttons. And the spoke itself, quite beautiful and not alien like we've seen in the iX3 recently. So it's a nice, solid BMW M steering wheel. The other thing I mentioned, of course, was the M drive control unit, which is so important. We don't want to be going into screens to have to access simple things to do with driving, and BMW M have kept all that necessary stuff here. So shifting down into S, into manual mode there, for example, you've got your setup button, my modes, M hybrid. It's important for this car. Let's, for example, go into setup, and then you can configure M1 and M2 to your liking within here, as you've always been able to. The difference being that there's a ton more options. For example, energy recovery, which is important in a plug-in hybrid, so that's all editable in here. And another one called M hybrid, where you can choose between these different modes. And this is quite an important part of this car. Electric is self-explanatory, and this is actually a nice part of the BMW M version of hybrid versus the normal BMW, where you can specifically select that you want to be in electric mode, and it's not left vague. Something I found in the BMW M hybrids, you couldn't even really tell when you're driving when the electric was being used, but it's very, very clear in this car. You'll see the blue bar for electric and then the red bar for combustion, and it's easy. And this is also easy to understand. E-Control holds your battery where it is right now. That's why it's called control. Electric is pure electric, hybrid is hybrid, and Dynamic and Dynamic Plus are there for when you want to use the hybrid system in a more aggressive way, so on a racetrack, etc. I've set M1 to Dynamic, and we've set M2 to Dynamic Plus should you need that. So it's really good in terms of that customizability. Then we got the M modes button, right? And you've seen this, it was debuted in the M3. Road is your normal one, and that's your driver zone that you have within it. But if we shift into Sport, I'm going to back up a bit, keep your eye on the ambient lighting, and we go into Sport. Actually, well, I need to turn the car on, hang on. Then we go into Sport. You will see the predominant color changes to red, but you still keep the tricolor in the middle, which is nice. It's interesting. You see that suddenly that's changed, and what you didn't see there was the driver zone change. I'll do it again for you. So we go into M mode, go back into road, and it's a more standard driver zone, and then you go back into Sport, and you see it shifts into the more M-like driver zone. And it's nice for the passenger, it's nice for the driver. You get this sudden change of focus in the interior that, okay, now we mean business. Generally speaking, I find the BMW M version of this operating system so much better than the standard BMW one. This whole widget view that you get in this, it's so much easier to use, it's so easy to understand. And it's really well themed in terms of everything being M themed. Every single font, every single color, the logical structure of the screen, it all just works better. And that hybrid element as well, so much more visible, so much easier to understand, so much clearer for the driver, as it should be. So yes, M doing a better job than BMW, even on the OS. The rear, massively spacious, good leg room, loads of head height thanks to the fact that you've got this massive glass roof. Sadly, the roof doesn't open, but it's a really great place to sit in the back. Well, despite the battery being here, I would say the boot is very spacious. Yep, very spacious indeed. And actually one of the more comfortable boots that I've been forcibly locked in. So I think a really nice interior. One thing I would have loved was a proper gear selector here, a BMW M1. The more unique BMW M things we can get into these cars, the more value for money they will be, I think, whether that's a key, whether that's a steering wheel, whether that's having a gear selector. M, I think, have to follow the Porsche route as much as they can of making what is their GT product cars essentially a bit more special, particularly considering the pricing that they're at. Now this is of course the top spec version of this car, okay? But the base comes in at 113K, and that is the one to go for. I'm telling you, if you want to buy a new car, always go for the base model, especially in BMW M cars. You will not miss the other bits that this car has, like the carbon ceramics, etc. Forget all that. Get the base model. You'll be happy near the end because you won't lose that much money. And it's great value for money, this car, the M5. You can't get anything else for this price with this type of power from the rivals. It just doesn't happen. Panamera's like 30K more. You know the story. This is a great value car. What's interesting for me is how much lower it sits versus the M3 CS Touring, which is a much more expensive car than this. But that kind of gives you a hint as to where this car is positioned versus that. And I want to talk about that element. I want to talk about living with it and what it's been like to drive on UK roads. Let's head out and drive the M5 G99. Now guys, for those of you used to the M3 or any other full-fat M car, your first interactions with this car will be somewhat familiar, but also a bit of a culture shock. For example, when you start the car off initially, it always starts off in electric. But for that dose of familiarity, just press the M1 button and that familiar MDNA, and your smile will come back. Starting in electric, which is pretty much the norm for plugins like this in the industry, isn't the worst thing in the world, and there's a number of scenarios where it totally makes sense. And in fact, that entire electric side is what kind of validates this car versus the M3 that's actually better at other things. And we'll talk about that later on. But we are Generation M, as BMW M call us, so we're going to start with our nice engine noises in M1 mode. And in an instant, that alien feeling is obliterated and you're welcomed by some proper MDNA. And immediately you're welcomed by the speed, the engine sound, the change in the steering now with it fighting against your inputs and your butt cheeks firmly clenched, just like the suspension has firmly stiffened up. With that lovely V8 rumble in the background, at this point, all feels right in the world and this car is saying, yes, I am an M car. Well, almost all is right, because regardless of what they've done here, it's hard to completely mask that extra 500 kg that this car has. Now, let's first begin by talking about that speed and that power. 727 horsepower sounds so impressive, but in reality, when you look at the extra weight and thus the power to weight ratio, it's there or thereabouts with the previous M5 competition or things even like today's M3 and the M4. So don't be dazzled by these figures in the newer hybrid cars. Just like this performance market has changed, our perception of these figures needs to change as well. And to really demonstrate that, let's start off first with the launch control. So 3.2 seconds, which is impressive for any super saloon, right? Until I remind you that on this very stretch of road, the M4 Cabriolet did it at 3.1 seconds. And I get it, you're annoyed. You're like, what's going on? Why has this happened? But I think there is a reason for this, and I don't think it's entirely mad either. You see, with performance cars in the past, they're all quite similar. The M3 and the M5, both rear-wheel driven back then. M5 would have been more horsepower, more speed, and that was a very simple formula. That's not the case in today's market anymore. In today's market, the M3 has proven itself to be the best pure M car for those who want to have pure performance, and that's evidenced by the M3 CS Touring's fantastic Nürburgring lap time, and of course the price that it sits at being higher than this car. Also, gone are the days where the lower end vehicles were trimmed worse and had less technology and didn't look as good inside and outside in a way to sell you up to the higher cars, particularly with BMW. That's not the case anymore. I think the M3 looks just as good, if not better, both inside and out versus this car. Now instead, you choose the type of car you want for the purpose. The M3 undoubtedly the one for pure performance, but its running cost daily will reflect that as well. The M5 tries to strike a much more difficult balance between that high-end performance plus daily usability and real efficiency and cost saving with an executive flair that really the M3 can't hope to match. That's not to say the M5 isn't fast. The power and the torque afforded by the hybrid system is insane, and in every other scenario it feels simply too fast for the road. And that's the resounding feeling you take away from driving this car, that it has every bit the speed that you would expect of this badge. Annoyingly, there have been some occasions where I've experienced lag from the system, where say it's been in the purely hybrid mode and it's a little bit laggy, and I've not been in the hybrid dynamic mode or dynamic plus. And equally, I've experienced some lag in the gearbox, even in the top setting, and I found this in the first drive as well, that you shift down and the number changes on the screen, but it takes a while for the actual gear to change. And that's unfortunate because the old dual clutches weren't like that. And that's something they need to work on with this torque converter. Finally, on the engine, the V8 rumble is nice, and we are lucky to have it. But it's probably the most muted V8 in the modern world that I've experienced at the moment. It's nothing like the AMGs or the Porsches, or indeed an old dinosaur like the RS6 Performance, which is probably the best sounding of the lot. It's got overruns, it's got little pops and bangs, you come off the throttle, etc. But you really need to concentrate to try and hear it, and that's unfortunate. It feels like it really needs a lot of amplification. Now don't get me wrong, still very grateful to have the V8, and anything less than that would have felt like a downgrade, but it does need some amplification. Someone like a Krapovich, maybe they recently announced a system, and perhaps something like that could help bring in the emotion that I feel is lacking in this. Then we come to the handling and the dynamics, which is really stand out. It's super impressive for a car of this size. The steering, like I said, gets much heavier, and you've got a really pointy front end that allows for those incredibly quick M-like directional changes that we're used to. For me, the standout bit is the body control, where this rigidity of this car is really incredible, and that's what I think helps mask the weight more than anything else. When this car was launched, I thought it was going to have some fancy suspension system, an active one like the Panamera, but it doesn't. Yet it still performs exactly as you would expect a super saloon of this level to do, which is really impressive. Though, keep in mind, it thus has the suspension rigidity of that type of super saloon as well. Even in comfort, it does feel really quite rigid, so bear that in mind. So that's one element I've noticed driving in the UK, and the other one is just how wide this car feels, particularly in these narrower B roads where you normally seek to have fun in a car like this. Modern cars have grown so much, and that's where the M3 then feels much more at home, being, you know, significantly narrower enough that you can enjoy it more on these type of roads. I will also say this: if you come into this car expecting an out-and-out performance car like the M3 or the RS6, you will end up being disappointed, because that's not what this car sets out to do. It wants to give you the high-end performance, but it also wants to layer it, like a modern plug-in would, with other things that those cars simply can't give you the benefit of. And to explain that, we are now going to shift into fully electric mode. Yes, in an M5. That is possible. Now, plug-in hybrids are not what they used to be. They now have massive range, they're really good at recuperation, all thanks to how much we've focused on electric recently. They've seen and reaped the benefits. My daily in the last year has been the GLC, which had around 70 miles of range, and I ended up using the battery side 80% versus the combustion side, which saved me a huge amount of money. And now you can achieve something like that in a mad performance car like the M5 that's quoting us around about 50 miles of electric range. And with that 50 miles of electric range, you're going to save a lot of costs. Think of things like school runs, grocery runs, local trips, commute to work. For most people, that 50-mile range is going to cover a ton of that, and it's going to save you a load of money when you don't necessarily need that V8 at that time. I've found, like in scenarios of driving in a place like the City of London, where you're restricted to 20 miles per hour and the V8 seems like a massive waste, using the electric then in those urban environments is brilliant. Or in buildings like car parks or car washes or areas where you normally need to turn the engine off if you're standing still, you can leave the electric side on and not disturb anyone else. And speaking of disturbing people, there are occasions when you don't necessarily want to start with the V8, say early mornings, late nights, when you want to just stealthily creep out, and then when you're ready, turn on the V8 and have some fun on an open road. For me, what excites me the most, having lived it now, is the fuel cost that you can save versus owning a traditional M5, say, in this scenario. But remember, all of this is predicated on the fact that you can charge efficiently or easily at somewhere like your house. But if none of that matters to you and you just want pure M performance, the M3 is the way to go. Or if you really want a V8 wagon, the only true rival is the RS6 Performance, which, let's be completely clear here, is the much more exciting car. That's because it's a one-dimensional tool from the past. It's a dinosaur from the past. And for most looking for pure performance, that car will satiate you. But I think this car, it fulfills a need that both the M3 and the RS6 could never fulfill. And indeed, a side that the M5 has never had before as well. Because this car still gives you this mad performance, but then on the other side, genuine real-world efficiency and cost saving to you. That just makes it a much more compelling car as a daily car than those two could ever hope to be. I almost went for this car as my daily, but went against it simply on the basis of cost, because I thought you're not getting that V8 emotion for the extra spend on this, and thus ended up going for the E53, which to my ears sounds pretty much as good. But if it was a toss-up between this and the M3 that I had previously as a daily, I would always choose this car, because it fits that bill much more thoroughly. But I think we are lucky to have this car, and BMW M have proved that they are listening to us and willing to give us what we want. But I'm also impressed by their understanding of how their own products need to differ and don't just need to be incremental betterment. And while yes, this is different to the M5s of the past, it is still very much an M5, and I think we are very lucky to have it around the world. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.